Yucca Mountain, in the desert, underneath the mountain, is probably as good a place as you're going to find, at least in the United States.
Well, and if the gentleman would grant me just a moment, I think when you said there's a mountain in the desert, or there's, I think, 131 locations as it exists today. And I can tell you I have 4 of those locations in the 11th District in Illinois. And look, well, I believe nuclear power is safe, effective, cheap, efficient. But right now there's 4 nuclear storage waste facilities in a district. And that's by the Midewin Tallgrass Prairie. That's by populated areas, towns. And I think, look, I think the American people, I think the issue right now is they just don't fully, haven't, and there's a lot of big issues going on in Washington, and this probably isn't the top of people's priority, but I would encourage anybody that's watching us right now that sees their senator's name on that board you had up earlier and says, hey, my senator is a yay, call and say thank you. Encourage that senator. If they're unsure, if they have the 3 yellow question marks, probably call that senator and say, hey, we really would like to get you on board with safe nuclear storage. And if they're a nay, please call them twice. Because I tell you, we react to what we hear. And if the American people want safe storage, and I know they do, then this is the right alternative.
And I appreciate, again, my colleague from coming down for this hour of discussion on really what should be the national policy on high-level nuclear waste in this country. Didn't get a chance to go through all the areas, but I'm going to end with Yucca Mountain versus the San Onofre nuclear generating station between L.A. and San Diego. This is one of the ones I'm talking about. How much nuclear waste is in the desert underneath the mountain? None. How much is on the Pacific Ocean, right on the coastline? There's the photo. 2,300 waste rods on site. The waste is stored, would be stored 1,000 feet underground at Yucca. The waste is stored above the ground in pools right on the shoreline of the Pacific Ocean. The waste would be 1,000 feet above the water table here. Of course, as you can see from the photo, the waste is right next to the Pacific Ocean. The waste at Yucca Mountain would be 100 miles from the Colorado River. Again, you can see the waves breaking almost right up to the nuclear generating station between L.A. and San Diego. I've gone to Massachusetts. I should have talked about Florida today. I've talked about Illinois, DOE locations like Washington State. There's a lot of nuclear waste defined differently all over this country. Let's do the correct public policy, get it at a single repository in the desert underneath the mountain. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate your diligence, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011. The gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Ellison, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm here to claim the hour, and I'm going to get my boards over there, so I'll be right back. Mr. Speaker, thank you for yielding me the time. Appreciate it. My name is Keith Ellison. I am the co-chair of the Progressive Caucus and a member of Congress from the great state of Minnesota. But I'm here claiming time to speak on behalf of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. The Congressional Progressive Caucus, Mr. Speaker, is that group, 77 members in the United States Congress, who believe that when we say the Pledge of Allegiance and we say liberty and justice for all, that means all. All meaning blacks, whites, Latinos, Asians, straights, gays, the senior citizens and the youngest among us, people with disabilities and people who are able-bodied. It means the great mass of American people, included liberty and justice for all. The Progressive Caucus believes in economic justice. We believe in civil rights and human rights for all people. We believe that public employees are valuable to our society, and we honor and respect the services that they give to us. We believe that America, with our awesome military power, should use that power to promote peace in the world. We are the ones who are going to who called for the U.S. to not go into Iraq, and then when we went in there, we were the ones who pushed to get us out. We are the ones who are raising the issues around Afghanistan, and will continue to argue the case for diplomacy and for development and to make friends with the world, to be a good member of the international community in the United Nations and under international bodies. We're not the ones who believe that the world is a scary, dangerous place and we got to jack up the military as much as we can. We're not the ones who think that the rich don't have enough money and the poor have too much. We're not the people who believe in dividing Americans based on culture and color and gender and urban versus rural. We believe in unifying Americans and having equal rights for all people. Yes, we are liberal and we are proud of it. We're the Progressive Caucus. And today, Mr. Speaker, I'm here to deliver the progressive message. The progressive message is what we're talking about today. And the topic I'm going to address, Mr. Speaker, is going to be jobs and this American economy. Today, Mr. Speaker, we want to speak as bipartisan as we can, but there's no question that the arguments that we have in Congress have a partisan tone, though therefore for us to sit up here and say that, you know, we're just all getting along here in Congress and we don't have a different point of view would be not exactly being straight with the American people. So we're going to say that the debates that we have been having in the House of Representatives have to do with those of us who believe that we as Americans need to live in harmony with the planet, need to try to cut down our carbon footprint, need to try to diminish pollution, and those others of us, mostly on the Republican side of the aisle, who make the case that for the sake of industry, we have to sacrifice our health, our lungs, our good, clean environment. We're making that case, and we're trying to ask Americans to look carefully at the differing programs that are being offered on this House floor and to make a decision. Do you believe that we have a responsibility to the poor? The Progressive Caucus does. Do you believe that public employees and government does bring quality and improve the quality of life for Americans? Not all the time. You know, government needs to be refined like everybody. But the Republicans and conservatives in this House who make the case that government is the problem, we wholeheartedly reject that point of view. That is wrong. We believe in a mixed economy where the private sector and the public sector exist to benefit the American people in general. You know, and so we're here to talk about these things tonight, and we're here to lay on the table so that Americans of all backgrounds, all colors, all cultures, all faiths can make decisions about what kind of America they want, because there are clearly two different visions of what America's about being offered on this House floor every day for the last year and for the next year. And I think Americans should be able to say, I think this is the kind of America I want. And others who think that rich people don't have enough money and poor people have too much, they can support the Republican program. Mr. Speaker, I want to talk a little bit about jobs tonight, and therefore I just want to make the case that, again, I don't think it's a good idea to always draw the partisan divide, but I think it is important to be honest. And my Republican colleagues just have not, even though they're the majority, have not introduced a single bill for jobs this whole time they've been in the majority. They'll say, oh yeah, we brought jobs, we had jobs bills. Didn't you see us cutting the EPA? That's not a jobs bill. Didn't you see us trying to let cement companies and be able to emit more pollution in the air? That's not a jobs bill. Didn't you see us trying to let coal companies, electric coal companies be able to put more emissions in the air? That's not a jobs bill. That's just saying industry can do what it wants to our lungs. But a jobs bill to help rebuild America's infrastructure, haven't seen that from our friends on the Republican side of the aisle. A jobs bill that would help refurbish public buildings like schools, haven't seen that. They don't want to do that. A jobs bill that would say, look, you know what, we need to train Americans to be able to do the jobs of the 21st century, to promote solar, wind, biomass, the waves, all these kind of ways that we can live in harmony with the earth and power the earth at the same time. They haven't had any jobs doing that to make our grid smarter, our electrical grid smarter. They don't want to put no money in that. They think that's a waste of money. The fact is, Republicans have not come up with the jobs agenda. I call it the Republican no jobs agenda. And you know, it's clear that the government has an important role in terms of jobs. You hear some of my Republican colleagues say the government doesn't create jobs. This is absurd. Ask any small retailer out there who's trying to make a go of it in their local community. They may have a nail shop, or they may have a hair shop, or they may sell retail clothing, or they may just a small little business that they opened up. If they don't have any police protection, that's the government, then that's going to cut the number of customers that come to them. That is going to hurt their business. Government helping business to thrive. Ask a trucker, somebody who may own their own rig, or maybe somebody who owns a trucking company. If we don't have public roads, highways, and things like that, that's the government. Where would their business model be? The internet. Think about Google. Think about all of the wondrous economic activity associated with the internet. Well, the internet was started by the government. Yes, it was. I'm telling you that whether it's the National Institute of Health coming up with life-saving innovation and funding important basic research, or whether it is the Food and Drug Administration giving Americans confidence that when they buy that product that it's not going to kill them, the government helps business thrive. It helps the market operate properly so that we don't have caveat emptor, so that the buyer doesn't have to beware, that the buyer knows that somebody somewhere is looking to make sure that the food is edible and the water is drinkable. Now, my friends on the Republican side of the aisle that say government doesn't do anything to help the economy are wrong. I was so proud to hear the President discredit the false economic theory of trickle-down. What is trickle-down, Mr. Speaker? Trickle-down is the theory that, look, if we give as much money as we possibly can to the richest Americans, and we take it from the poorest Americans in the middle class, then maybe the rich people, through investments and stuff, will put money into the economy, and maybe it'll trickle down and other people will be able to get something out of it. Well, the President said it's an okay theory except for it doesn't work. The President's right. Trickle-down is a failure, and trickle-down doesn't work. I'm so glad that the President really helped explain this to the American people, because trickle-down at the end of the day just leaves, it doesn't trickle down, it just stays up there. And that's why we see so much wealth concentrated in the hands of so few, because the Republicans think the only way to make the economy work is to cut all of our health and environmental regulations and to give tax breaks to people who already have more money than they know what to do with. Some of my Republican friends like to say, well, you've never met a payroll. I met a payroll. I was a small business owner for many years. And I was a lawyer and ran a law firm, had to pay my staff. And it wasn't taxes and stuff that I worried about. You know what I worried about, Mr. Speaker? I worried about customers. Could I get some clients coming through the door asking me to write a will, to incorporate their business? Could I get some clients to say, would you represent me in this accident, or I got in a little trouble, would you represent me in that? Clients is what I need, and if my customers didn't have any money, they wouldn't be able to hire me. But if the customers aren't working and the economy is poor, and there's no money circulating amongst working folk, my business suffered. And if people were doing well, my business would thrive. You ask any business person, what would you rather have, a tax cut or a lot of customers? They're going to say, customers, I want customers. And so this claim that the Republicans make that you know, we don't need to make sure that the average working American is doing well, we just make sure that the money is up, gets up to the top, and it'll trickle down, is not true, and I'm so glad that the President made that point today. We've got to destroy myths around this economy, because again, there are people who tell self-serving narratives. They tell stories and narratives that help them make more money. I'm sure that the Koch brothers, who've given a lot of donations around, who own this big refinery and make a lot of money, would really like it if we all believed that giving them a huge tax cut and getting rid of environmental regulations was good for the economy. Of course, we don't believe it because it isn't true, but we know that if we keep on arguing, that masses of American people will say, you know what, I think it's okay to help to have unemployment insurance for people who are out of work. You know, I think it's okay to in an economy like this, to extend the payroll tax cut. Rich people get tax cuts. Republicans like it when rich people get tax cuts. They don't like it when middle working people get tax cuts. You'd rather have just the rich people get them. But the fact is, people are waking up all over America. They're saying, hey, you know, when I voted last time, or I didn't vote last time, I was upset because of the job situation. And my friends on the Republican side of the aisle didn't get to the business of jobs. They got in here going after the EPA and going after tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans, and because of that, you know, things haven't been good. Now, I will give President Obama some credit, and because of the good work that he has done, we have seen private job growth continue for about 24 months. The problem is we have cut the government so badly and at the wrong time that state and local governments have had to shed public employees left, right, and center. We are literally seeing gains in private sector employment being offset by cuts in public sector employment, and it's unfortunate that that's the situation that we have. So today I'm here with the progressive message. Today we're here to illustrate what's at stake in America today, and this week thousands of Americans all across the country came here to Washington to raise their voices. They call themselves the 99%. And I have to say, it's starting to feel like the people's house around here. I had a number of folks in my office who came on a 24-hour bus ride, Mr. Speaker, from my district in Minneapolis to come tell me that, look, you know, we've got to rebuild America and put people back to work. Infrastructure crumbling, people can work to rebuild it. They said, hey, look, you know, this income inequality is not working, and as you get more and more tax cuts and loopholes to the richest, it just ends up hurting us. I had to tell them that two-thirds of all American corporations don't pay any taxes at all. Two-thirds of all American corporations don't pay any taxes at all. And I brought them this chart, Mr. Speaker. I pulled this chart out because it was hard for them to believe. I told them, I said, you know, the companies on this chart that I'm about to show you, you know, show me however much money you have in your pocket, you paid at least as much taxes as these companies, because if you paid nothing, then you paid the same as them. If you got 1 penny, you paid more than them. Bank of America paid no taxes. Now, let me tell you the story about Bank of America, Mr. Speaker. Bank of America made bad business deals. When you make a bad deal in business, you're supposed to pay for that. You know, things go wrong. People go out of business. Bank of America, they went and bought Merrill Lynch after this guy, this CEO named Stan O'Neill, ran the company into the ground. They still gave him a golden parachute of like several $100 million. And you know, I often joke and say I'd have been happy to run the company into the ground for just $1 million. But he did it for, they paid him millions to run the Merrill Lynch into the ground. And Bank of America bought that company. And then Countrywide, which is the leading predatory lender, subprime lender, bought them. Bank of America did. Got all these bad mortgages that weren't performing because they were never properly underwritten, because people made money by just selling the mortgage and then selling the paper, and that, it was like a hot potato. Once you sold the mortgage, you got the fees out of it, send it to somebody else to be securitized into a mortgage-backed security. So a lot of those happen. And Bank of America bought those two companies, and then it started causing them losses. And then they said, America, America, we're going down. Help us, please. And then they called us all together in September and October 2008 and said, we need a bailout, please. We came up with a bill called TARP, and a Bank of America got bailed out. Now, the problem is, after Bank of America got bailed out and got back up on its feet somewhat, they paid all their executives big, giant bonuses. They laid off 30,000 people. What? Yeah, that's how they repay the American people, helping them out. Citigroup, another one, paid no taxes. They got saved. They were absolutely going down. They probably are, I don't know. The Citigroup is a company with a lot of problems, paid no taxes. ExxonMobil. Now, these people are making money hand over fist. They are making money. They are very, very, very profitable. Why? Because you're happy to pay $3 gas. If you could go pay $3, you'd be like, hooray, this is the store I'm going to go to. Well, and you know, you see it going up to 4. And over the last few years, it's fluctuated between 3 and 4. Well, do you think that ExxonMobil's not making money on that? They are absolutely making money hand over fist because of that, and yet they pay no taxes. So, look, the fact is, GE, don't let me forget about my friends at GE. They got, I think they're the biggest corporation in the world. No taxes. GE pays no taxes. I'm like, look, you know, GE, the government, because we've cut taxes for the wealthiest people and 2/3 of all corporations don't pay any taxes, we don't have that much money. We're in a position where we may have to cut Head Start, home heating oil program for senior citizens. Do y'all think you could do a little bit better? And they say, no, can't do nothing for you. This is amazing. You mean to tell me you got more, the executives of these companies got more houses that they can ever visit. They got more lakes that they live on than they could ever water ski on. They got more $1,500 Armani suits that they could ever wear. They got more monogram shirts that are tailored that they could ever put on. They got more expensive shoes. They travel all over the world. They fly around in jets, and they won't pay nothing. And we got to then talk about cutting home heating oil, the light heat program, cut the food stamp program. I mean, how do you sleep at night? It's amazing to me. Shocking, shocking. And I'm sure all of them look at each other and they say, well, you know, we earned it. You can't tell me that you earned that. This is, and I'm going to tell you, you know, Mr. Speaker, some people want to say, well, they work hard. No, this is not true. What they do is they take all that money that they make and they come down here and they get us to go argue for loopholes for them. And they $50 million was spent lobbying Congress, $130 million spent giving donations to campaigns. 94% as of 2008, 94% of all candidates with the most money win the election. And about 261 of members of Congress, and there's only 535 of us, are millionaires. The average worth here is about $700,000. And let me tell you, I'm not one of those rich guys. I actually live on the money my constituents pay me because I'm working for them 24/7. And yet, you know, I go to the grocery store. I know how much bread costs. And so what I'm saying is, to whom much is given, much is expected. And if America, nation that I love so much, has a military which protects us all, has a police department which protects us in our local communities, has a fire department which makes sure that Bank of America branches don't burn to the ground. America, if one of their executives or employees gets sick, the EMT truck, the emergency medical truck is going to come help them and bring them back to life if they can. the roads and the bridges that people drive to work on to all these companies, publicly paid for. And yet they turn around and say, yeah, you've done all that for us, America, but we got nothing for you. Zero taxes. It's wrong. And there should be an Occupy movement to say so. Now, this is a chart, Mr. Speaker, that I do like to pull out now and again. And I want to say that I actually have no beef with Donald Trump or Paris Hilton. I'm sure they're both nice people. But, you know, do you really think they need a tax break, Mr. Speaker? I think they're getting along just fine. I think that some of my neighbors who are firefighters and cops and teachers, or who work at the local bank branch, or who work at the local grocery store stocking up groceries, I think they can use a little help. But I do believe that if Donald and Paris don't get a tax break, they'll manage just fine. These are the millionaires and billionaires of our society. When we cut taxes for the richest people, you're putting more money in the hands of these folk. I don't think that's wise public policy. So my point, Mr. Speaker, is just this. You know, you want to talk tax breaks. We're actually talking about extending the payroll tax deduction so that $1,500, you know, could stay in the hands of people who are really struggling. We asked in the U.S. Senate, there was a bill that said, you know what, millionaires, on your first million, we're not asking you for no more taxes on your first million. But on your second million, can we have 3%? You know, what do you think? They're like, nope, nothing to it. I said, even if it's going to help working class people, you know, will you help then? Nope, can't do it. Cannot possibly do it. It might sap their incentive to work. If we were to help the working class people of America, it might sap their incentive to work, so we can't help them. Tax breaks for billionaires, or tax breaks for teachers, police, firefighters, job training, small business, investment, better schools, clean energy, health care, infrastructure investment, college affordability. Now, my question is, Mr. Speaker, what are America's priorities? I got a feeling that they're with these folk down here. I don't think they are. I think America would rather help these folk than these folk. Just a wild guess. So that's all we're asking for. You know, this payroll tax deduction, you know, $1,000, $1,500 in the pockets of people who really need it. We asked billionaires, millionaires to pony up just a little more. Wouldn't even notice it. Wouldn't even have to cancel any of your country club memberships. But they said no. They said no. There is a loss of civic virtue among some of our most privileged Americans. But I'm proud to tell you about a group of guys and women called the Patriotic Millionaires. They came to a forum that the Progressive Caucus organized last week, Mr. Speaker, and the Patriotic Millionaires said, you know what? You've invested in research, which we used to make our products that made us rich. You invested in roads and bridges and education that we used to help us rich. And we love America more than we love all that money, and we're here to pay taxes. And then some smarty-pants Republican said, well, if you want to pay extra and you're rich, you can. I'm sure the Treasury will accept your check. And then one of those patriotic millionaires said something really, really wise. He said, you know, America's not a charity. America is all of our responsibility. And we all should, and that's what taxes are. I'm here today, Mr. Speaker, to argue that taxes are the dues we pay to live in a civilized society. Taxes are not a punishment. When they talk about tax relief, relief from what? Relief from good schools and clean water? When they say when they say tax burden, I mean, let me tell you, you know, if you want to live in a society where there's no taxes and therefore no public services, you can move to Somalia. That's what it is. No government. I don't see any of our friends who love who are I call them the free market fundamentalists. I don't see them running to Somalia to move to Mogadishu. So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say, quite frankly, that on this Thursday night, in this great country, in my view, the greatest country in the history of the world, Americans have a question before themselves. Are we going to choose community, choose each other, or is it going to be a selfish pursuit where everybody is only on their own? I view America as people who look out for each other, even the least of thee. Americans don't think that helping seniors who are on Social Security is a bad thing to do. Americans don't think that helping the poor and the sick is somehow a bad thing to do. In fact, one of the things that illustrated this debate, this national debate we're having, Mr. Speaker, is something that happened in the United States Senate today, the other body. Today, and I can't blame my friends in the House, my Republican friends in the House, they didn't do this one. But today, Republicans in the Senate voted to block President Obama's appointment of Richard Cordray to head the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now look, the Consumer Protection Bureau, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau came about because of the massive failure of decency on Wall Street that resulted in all of the foreclosures and in America having to bail out the likes of Bear Stearns and Bank of America and a whole bunch of others. And they said, look, you know, it's a mortgage document can be very complicated. And we just want to have a bureau that will try to make these things simpler so people know what they're signing up for. A bureau that will say you got to say what the interest rate's going to be, you got to say what the terms are going to be, so that we can have transparency. Actually, the real free marketeers around here would never be against more information and better and more effective information going to the consumer. I mean, Adam Smith, the one who wrote, you know, oh my goodness, I can't believe I can't remember the name of that great book, but the one in which he describes the invisible hand and how markets move and people operating in their individual interests yields the economy. He said in that book that consumer information is key to a good market operating. So I don't know why people wouldn't want a good market to operate. But anyway, Republicans in the Senate, can't blame the House members this time, like to claim that the new Consumer Financial Protection Agency would be reformed before it gets a new director. They say they won't even allow it to exist. They won't even allow it to have a director until they change it. Well, we had a vote and it came into being, so now they're trying to wreck it before it even gets up and running. The truth is that these folks who are against consumer protection and the lobbyists that support them are trying to water down our new consumer watchdog's power so they can't hold Wall Street and predatory lenders accountable. That's too bad. They don't want anybody to be the new cop on the beat protecting all Americans against these predatory lenders. And I've always said, look, if you're offering a good financial product that helps people and is fair, why would you be afraid of a little transparency? Only if your business model is based on bilking and cheating customers would you want to fight against a consumer product, a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Without an enforcer and without real powers to crack down on predatory loans, we will keep on seeing mortgages that are designed to fail from the very beginning, tricking people with the fine print, cheating consumers to make a quick buck. So, Mr. Speaker, I see that Republicans are ready to take the time. I'm happy to yield it. I'm going to yield back the balance of my time in just a moment, but I just want to say that America was a good idea. America is a good idea, but it's an idea that you have to fight for. And the idea of liberty and justice for all, living in a fair, prosperous economy is something that Americans all over this country have to stand up and assert, because if we leave it to the big guys, to the 1%, to the people with all the money and all the dough, they're going to snatch this great American dream away from us. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair lays before the House the following enrolled bills.
Senate 535, an act to authorize the Secretary of the Interior to lease certain lands within Fort Pulaski National Monument and for other purposes.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher, for 30 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. First, before I go into my remarks that I have prepared, I just would like to point out that I personally have opposed all the bailouts and the hundreds of billions of dollars that the Obama administration has channeled to different financial wheeler-dealers and cronies like Goldman Sachs and the others that have received so much money as directed to them from this administration. And just to put it on the record, many of these so-called corporations that that my colleague just pointed out, if we take a look, when we say if we're going to increase taxes on them, these corporations are actually, their biggest stockholders happen to be pension funds. And what we're really talking about by trying to say we're going to just tax these big corporations, what we're really doing is taxing the pension funds and are taxing the entities that provide the money for the pension funds for the rest of the citizens of this country. But that is another issue that I will discuss some other day. Today, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to rise as a strong advocate of human progress through advancing mankind's understanding of science and engineering. I rise to discuss the blatant abuse and misuse of science. A few nights ago, I watched a video of President Eisenhower's 1961 farewell address. Unfortunately, his much heralded warnings about the military-industrial complex, which were right on target, I might add, that warning has unfortunately obscured another warning in that farewell address that is just as significant. Eisenhower pointed to the danger, and I quote, of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet, and I continue to quote, yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy itself could become a captive of a scientific technological elite. In my lifetime, there has been no greater example of this threat, which Eisenhower warned us about, than the insidious coalition of research, science, and political largesse, a coalition that has conducted an unrelenting crusade to convince the American people that their health and safety, and yes, their very survival on this planet, is at risk due to man-made global warming. The purpose of this greatest of all propaganda campaigns is to enlist public support for, if not just acquiescence to, a dramatic mandated change in our society and a mandated change to our way of life. This campaign has such momentum and power that it is now a tangible threat to our freedom and our prosperity as a people. Ironically, the crusade against ironically, as the crusade against man-made global warming grows in power, more evidence surfaces every day that the scientific theory on which the alarmists have based their crusade is totally bogus. The general public and decision makers for decades have been inundated with phony science, altered numbers, outright fraud. This is the ultimate power grab in the name of saving the world. And like all other fanatics, disagreement is not allowed in such endeavors. Prominent scientists who have been skeptical with the claims of man-made global warming have themselves been cut from research grants and obstructed when trying to publish peer-review dissenting opinions. How the mainstream media, or publications like National Journal, for example, have ignored the systematic oppression that I speak about is beyond me. If you've heard the words "case closed," it doesn't take a genius to figure out that the purpose of such a proclamation is limiting and repressing debate. Well, the case isn't closed, so let's start with some facts about man-made global warming and the theory of man-made global warming. First and foremost, The Earth has experienced cooling and warming climate cycles for millions of years, which a significant number of prominent scientists believe is tied to solar activity, just like similar temperature trends have been identified on Mars and other bodies in the solar system, and that is the sun. So how about those ice caps on Mars? They seem to expand and recede, mirroring our own polar ice caps. Doesn't that point to the sun rather than human activity? After all, there are very few, if any, human beings around on Mars, and certainly millions of years ago when we had other cycles in the world, there weren't very many human beings, if any, around. So where do the climate cycles come from? Well, what causes climate cycles? Right off the bat, let's acknowledge that man-made global warming advocates, who I suggest are alarmists, do not believe the sun has no impact on climate cycles, just as they believe that the sun has a minimal impact as compared to the increasing level of CO2 in the atmosphere. So they believe that basically the sun does have some impact, but nothing compared to the increase in CO2 in the atmosphere, which today they believe this increase in CO2 in the atmosphere has become very frightening because mankind is using fossil fuels, which they believe is causing this dramatic increase in CO2. Well, similarly, skeptics like me believe solar activity, the sun, is the major factor in creating the Earth's climate cycles, including the one that we're currently in. But we also believe that man-made CO2 buildup may have a minor impact. The debate isn't all sun or all mandated CO2. It's over which of these factors is a major determinant or even the significant determinant. And at this point, one other fact needs to be understood. Many intelligent people believe that CO2, carbon dioxide, represents 10, 20, even 30% of the atmosphere. Now, answer the question, if anyone is reading this or listening to this, what do you think the percentage is after all of this, what we've heard time and time again, how CO2 is changing the climate of our planet? Well, as I say, most people think it's 10, 20, even 30% of the atmosphere. In reality, CO2 is less than 1/2 of 1/10 of 1% of the atmosphere. And humankind's contribution to that 1/2 of 1/10 of 1% is a small fraction of that. So to say that what we're talking about is minuscule, no, that's not smart enough. What it really is microscopic. Frankly, I believe CO2 is so irrelevant that it should not be the focus of air standards and regulations. After all, it is not harmful to human beings, unless, of course, you stick it into your automobile in the garage and shut the door for hours and hours at a time. But the CO2 that's in the atmosphere is not harmful. Other gases like NOx, which are damaging to human health, should be a much higher priority than CO2. NOx is harmful to people's health. It's global pollution, not global warming, that we should be concerned about. Not making this distinction has cost us billions, maybe more. The temperature of this planet isn't man-made, and we can't do anything about it. Our energy challenges and the air quality that we have are man-influenced, if not man-made. We can do something about these maladies, but the alarmists are not interested in solving those problems. They are part of a coalition that wants to change our way of life, which requires us to acquiesce, or better yet, to frighten us into submission. Make no mistake, the man-made global warming theory is being used to push, the man-made global warming theory is being pushed by people who believe in global government. They have been looking for an excuse for an incredible freedom-busting centralization of power for a long time, and they found it in the specter of man-made global warming. Well, for the past 30 years, the alarmists have been spouting Chicken Little climate science, and this campaign was turbocharged in the 1990s when the Clinton administration made it part of its agenda thanks to Vice President Al Gore. One of the first actions that the administration took was to fire the top scientist at the Department of Education, Dr. William Happer, a professional who at the time dared to be open-minded about the global warming theory. Al Gore decided Dr. Happer just didn't fit in, and out he went. From there, the pattern became all too clear. In order to receive even one iota of federal research funds, a scientist had to toe the line on man-made global warming. There's a biblical quote, "The truth shall set you free." Well, this is a battle for the truth, and we are up against a political machine that has been yelling, "Case closed," and restricting federal research grants only to those who agree with them. That we have politicos who believe in centralizing power and are willing to use their own power certainly should surprise no one. But that a scientific technological elite, the very group that President Eisenhower warned us against 50 years ago, allied themselves with such a political power play is totally contrary to what science and scientists are supposed to be all about. Because of the retaliation of those alarmists in charge of bestowing the federal research grants, opposition to this power grab has taken time to coalesce. But the opposition to the man-made global warming theory is now evident, and it won't be ignored. There have been major conferences here in Washington and at other locations around the nation with hundreds of prominent members of the scientific community, individuals, many of whom are renowned scientists with PhDs, the heads of major university science departments, including a few Nobel Prize winners, have all stepped up and spoken out. Even with little news coverage, this group, who are accurately referred to as skeptics, are gaining ever more recognition and ever more influence. They face the daunting challenge, however, they, as I say, have to fight for any attention, even though they have just as good a credentials as those people who are advocating on the other side. For a list of some of these credentialed and very well-respected skeptics, one can visit my website. I'm Congressman Dana Rohrabacher from California. So what is this apocalyptic man-made global warming theory that the globalists and the radical environmentalists would have us believe in? It is that our planet is dramatically heating up because we human beings, especially Americans, put large amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere as a result of using oil, gas, and coal as fuel. The CO2 has an impact in that it entraps a certain amount of heat in the atmosphere, thus dangerously warming the planet. We have been warned about huge changes in our environment, including a 10-degree jump in the overall temperature, and thus a serious rise in the level of the oceans of the world. Vice President Gore, in his movie, An Inconvenient Truth, showed that what seemed to be a video of melting and breaking ice caps. Inconveniently, somebody squealed, and the video was actually a special effect. It was styrofoam made to look like melting and breaking ice caps. But that's no problem. People still listen to Al Gore. The alarmists have been over and over again, the alarmists have said that the Earth is dramatically heating up. Well, look close at the data that they're talking about. Look close at the date that was picked by these people as a baseline for comparing temperatures. It is 1850. And what is 1850? It's the end of a 500-year decline in the Earth's temperature. The Little Ice Age was ending in the 1850s. So skeptics say that a 1 or 2 degree increase in the planet's temperature is irrelevant if the basis of comparison is a 500-year low in the Earth's temperature. To skeptics, currently we are just in another natural climate cycle. That's what we as skeptics believe. This is another natural climate cycle, and it's been going on, as was the 500-year decline in the Earth's temperatures. If it's going up a little bit now, that is a natural climate cycle. To alarmists, however, the sky is falling a couple degrees warmer, and the sky is heating, or it's falling, that is, or heating. And all of this is caused by mankind's pumping CO2 into the air. This theory of man-made CO2 causing global warming to emerge when and this whole theory emerged when scientists mistakenly believed that the data that they were studying from ice cores indicated that a warming of our planet was happening after a major increase in CO2. However, later it was found that the ice cores were misread. Nicholas Callione pointed out in Science magazine in 2003 the CO2 increase lagged Antarctic deglaciarization warming by 800 to 200 years, give or take 200 years. End of quote. So the heating came first, and then the CO2 increased, not the other way around. Yes, when the Earth heats up, there is more CO2. But we've been told the opposite over and over again, and we were told it was the CO2 that was making the Earth heat up. And they were telling us that the Earth will keep heating up until it reaches a tipping point, and then there'll be a huge jump in the temperature. The temperature will shoot up once it reaches this tipping point. And we could expect, this is what we were told over and over again by the scientists, predicting over and over again that we could expect this warming to go on and on until we quit using CO2 and quit using these CO2-emitting fossil fuels as a major source of our energy. Well, the future they described was hot and bleak, but their frightening illusion began to disintegrate when about 9 years ago, even as more CO2 was being pumped into the air and has continued to be pumped into the air, the Earth quit warming. And, in fact, it may be now in a cooling cycle. That's right. The NOAA National Climate Data Center shows that ground surface temperatures have flattened out, and there hasn't been any net warming since 1998. And the RSS microwave sounding units, that's the MSU, operating on NOAA satellites, show a net cooling since 1998. Totally the opposite of every prediction of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that's the IPCC, and their faulty computer models, as well as the army of global warming scientists who've been warning us about higher and higher temperatures of what we could expect. Well, miraculously, the frantic claims and predictions of man-made global warming have now been replaced with a new all-encompassing warning. So if it gets colder or it gets warmer, the alarmists will have their way, because that's being caused by too much CO2. Well, what is being caused? Well, whatever it is, it's being caused by it. And so they've changed the words from global warming to climate change and have replaced, as I say, global warming with their climate change. Well, I guess they think that we would just forget about the predictions and their predictions over and over again being 100% wrong. Even the much touted melting of the ice caps has now reversed itself in the last few years. According to the most recent data from the National Snow and Ice Center in Boulder, Colorado, not all the ice caps are melting now. There's melting, and there is also refreezing going on. So the polar ice caps aren't going away, and yes, the polar bears are not becoming extinct. They were put on the extinct list even though they weren't extinct. In fact, there are some number of polar bear families that are growing dramatically in the last few years, even as we were warned that polar bears were becoming extinct. Warming has ended, but the power grab continues. What we are now finding out is exactly how ruthless and, yes, deceitful that power grab has been. One example of blackballing is of prominent scientists like Dr. William Gray, Emeritus Professor of Atmospheric Science at Colorado State University and the head of the Tropical Meteorological Project at CSU's Department of Atmospheric Science. Gray had the courage and honesty to point out that there have not in recent years been more and stronger hurricanes and other such storms than in the past. No more research grants for him, no attention in the media either. Zealots can usually find high-sounding excuses for their transgressions against other professionals like Dr. Gray. Professional figures in white coats with authoritative tones of voices and lots of credentials repeatedly dismiss criticism by claiming that their so-called scientific findings had been peer-reviewed, verified by other scientists. It sounds so much beyond reproach. They gave each other prizes as they selectively handed out research grants. To those who disagreed, like Dr. Gray, no matter how prominent, they were treated like non-entities, like they didn't exist, or were personally disparaged with labels like denier. Well, you know, Holocaust denier. That's what you do. Now, how much uglier does it get? How much against the standard of professional science can you be than to try to paint someone like that because he disagrees with you? Well, these unprofessional tactics won't work forever, and it's becoming ever clearer that the man-made global warming steamroller is beginning to fall apart. We now know the scientists clamoring for subservient acceptance to their theory of man-made global warming were themselves making a sham out of the scientific methodology. We now know what they were doing. I am speaking, of course, of ClimateGate, the publication of over 1,000 emails and 3,000 other unofficially obtained documents from one of the world's foremost global warming research institutes, the Climate Research Unit of East Anglia University in the United Kingdom. And we've all heard those quotes, and here's a few of them. We can't account for the lack of warming at the moment, and it's a travesty that we can't. End of quote. How about another quote? I've just completed Mike's nature trick to hide the decline. End of quote. Here's another quote. We'll keep them, meaning the skeptics of their science, we'll keep them out somehow, even if we have to redefine what peer review literature is. How about this for another quote? If they ever hear there is a Freedom of Information Act now in the UK, I think I'll delete the file rather than send it to anyone. End of quote. Deleting files? Trying to prevent peer review? What kind of scientists were these? Well, arrogant and politically motivated scientists, that's who. The unauthorized release of those internal memos exposed the shenanigans of the man-made global warming alarmists and the crime being committed against science and the public. Even though hand-picked panels of their peers held a kangaroo court, their own peers judged them, that's right, and that kangaroo court loudly proclaimed that there had been no wrongdoing by these people. Well, public confidence was justifiably shaken in the global warming science, science advocates. Now, just as that scandal was about to be forgotten, we have even a larger database of communication being exposed, showing even more clearly how this elite operates, and it ain't pretty. Here are some of the quotes from the newly released database. Quote, unfortunately, there is no way to fix the IPCC, and there never was. The reason is that its information over 20 years ago was to support political and energy policy goals, not to search for scientific truth, end of quote. Here's another quote. If you disagree with their interpretation of climate change, you were left out of the IPCC process. They ignore or fight against any evidence which does not support their policy-driven mission, even to the point of pressuring scientific journals not to publish papers which might hurt the IPCC's efforts, end of quote. And here's another one regarding the IPCC. I also think the science is being manipulated to put a political spin on it, end of quote. Here's another one. It's very likely that the mean temperature has shown much larger past variability than caught by previous reconstructions. We cannot, from these reconstructions, conclude that the previous 50-year period has been unique in the context of the last 500 to 1,000 years. What's that mean? That means the current cycle we're in has nothing to do with the burning of fossil fuel by human beings. I would like to insert a record, an article from James Taylor of Forbes magazine, who says the ClimateGate 2, I quote, "These scientists view global warming as a political cause rather than a balanced scientific inquiry." I'd like to submit that for the record at this point.
Without objection.
Perhaps the most perplexing aspect of all of this, amid all the consternation about their malpractice to which we now have been exposed, the global warming elite just keeps a straight face. They keep up their PowerPoint presentations, distorted graphs and all, and continue projections of man-made global doom and gloom. They try to ignore the uproar and change the subject, but these recent revelations seriously call into question the basic science of man-made global warming fanatics. In the meantime, a report was recently issued by the world-respected scientists at the CERN in Switzerland. The CERN study demonstrated that it is cosmic rays from the sun that determine global cloud cover, and the clouds dramatically have much more to do. The cloud cover around the Earth during periods in its history has much more to do with temperature than the minuscule amounts of CO2 in the atmosphere. The Cloud Project at the highly respected CERN laboratory published a paper in the Journal of Nature this past August based on their research, which shows that the sun's activity is influencing cloud formation and may account for most of the recorded temperature changes in the last century. I now submit an editorial about this project from the Wall Street Journal by Ann Joyles for the record.
Without objection.
Okay. In this piece, she says,